Welcome to the Knights of Vader, a Star Wars podcast. It is May 29th, 2018, and we have a special episode for you. Understanding the box office failure of Solo: A Star Wars Story. Check out our sponsor, SkywardFunSupply.com, from Funko Pops to 3 3/4 inch figures and all the way to 6-inch Black Series. SkywardFunSupply.com is your home for Star Wars toys. My name is Zach Weber, and this is another solo episode. Yes, I am milking that joke for all it's worth. In this special episode, I know I promised, or I said I was not going to do a Thursday episode following the release of Solo. But after all the consternation and hoopla that has been going around based on this Solo box office and a lot of the misunderstanding that's going around it, I felt compelled to discuss this aspect of why Solo: A Star Wars Story is bombing at the box office. It was around sometime last night that I was getting into a debate with someone on the Jedi Temple Archives comment section about the failure of Solo. And so I felt compelled to do a 7-point breakdown of why I feel Solo is bombing. First and foremost, everybody has to accept it. This is not fake news. This is not clickbait. This is not overzealous rhetoric. Solo is, in fact, bombing. The production budget ranges no one knows for certain. The original budget under Lord Miller was around $150 million. When Ron Howard took over, it's not reported, but it's rumored to be in the ballpark of $250 to $300 million. It's worth noting that in order for a film to be successful, it has to make at least 2 to 2.5 and sometimes even 3 times its production budget, depending on its marketing cost, print. It's also worth noting that, like, if someone's on Box Office Mojo or any of the other box office sites, is that you'll see a film that has a budget of $200 million and it grossed $250 worldwide. It's like, oh, obviously it made money. No, because most times the movie studio only gets about half of what the movie's gross receipts are. So that's where the 2.5 comes in, because plus a lot of marketing costs aren't factored in to the production budget that you sometimes is reported on, like the trades like Hollywood Reporter, Deadline, and so on and so forth. Plus on Box Office Mojo, when you see that little production budget, that does not include marketing cost. So first and foremost, Solo is bombing. It is in the ballpark, I think, total-wise. I am looking at this right now. As of May 29th at 2:30 Eastern Standard Time, Solo has grossed $168 million worldwide. If we follow popular opinion, most films, if they have a decent run, usually make 3 times their domestic opening, as in domestic U.S., North America. Solo made around 84, so if Solo makes it to around 200, I'd say around 250 million, it's in pretty good shape. That means it had a decent run. It doesn't mean it's profitable. The rate that it's going overseas, if it gets to $500 million, I think it'll be lucky. And with that all being said, with the production budget being somewhere around 250 million plus, the film would have to gross worldwide around $750 million minimum in order to break even, which I don't think is. I don't care how great your word of mouth is. It's not getting that far. It's because you'd have to have a rally from behind like a Titanic to really sit there, plunge ahead that forward. So first and foremost, let me get to my points. This is why I feel Solo is bombing. Point number 1, crowded marketplace. And by the way, these 8 points I'm getting into, I am not ranking them by importance. They're just there. It's up to you to decide which point you feel is more forceful in Solo's bombing, but I did not determine intensity when I was doing this. Crowded marketplace. First, I think everybody's aware of Infinity War and Deadpool 2. Infinity War was a juggernaut. I think it was foolhardy for Disney to even put any of their movies within the realm of Infinity War. I know there was a theory going around in the late winter, early spring that Disney had written off Solo. Considering how close they placed it to Infinity War, I think that's fair to say. They really did not care about Solo that much, considering they could have moved it back. And Deadpool 2 has its own problems. If you look at its second weekend drop, it dropped 66% in its second weekend, which is the exact same drop Green Lantern had in 2011. So there you go, Ryan Reynolds. You can end Deadpool 2 with you getting but you know what? Deadpool 2 ain't out of the woods just yet. And that's what it comes down to. Like, who knows? Solo does have a couple of weeks until Jurassic World comes out. But like I said, if Solo can get, let's be really optimistic and say 300 million domestic. I don't see that happening as the Knights of Vader famous box office prognosticator. But even if it did, it's kind of the idea of, did it take you 60 seconds to drown, or did it take you 2 minutes to drown? You're ultimately, you're not getting past this, so why even bother? Second thing, the release calendar. I kind of already got into this with Infinity War. The competition here, it really was. This was a crowded month. Deadpool 2 moving from early June to mid-May certainly did not help matters any. And on top of that, Solo had a bunch of places it could have moved. I still say that if you would have moved Christopher Robin to maybe sometime in October, or even to maybe early November, and you gave Solo that first weekend of August, which gave us Guardians of the Galaxy, Suicide Squad, it's a great spot for off-kilter blockbusters or things that you're trying to position differently. I know Josh Trank's Forstick even tried that, but the first weekend of August is a great way to position a blockbuster that has the potential to break out. Obviously, they chose not to do that, and Disney basically runs the table when it comes to the Hollywood blockbuster release schedule. Memorial Day weekend. Now, that's the thing that's been floating around the last few days. It is a quote-unquote cursed weekend for opening movies. I think that's true because a lot of people go on vacation now for Memorial Day. People sit there, much like how Zenger wasn't available for our Memorial Day recording of our Solo review. People go on vacation, especially after the nasty winter we had. People are relishing in the warm weather. So people took the opportunity and ran with it. Or if they weren't in their local community, they flew somewhere, they went on vacation somewhere, and they just they did not spend their Memorial Day holiday in a movie theater. And one last thing to say about May and Star Wars. I absolutely loved that we got a Star Wars movie in May, but after the disastrous opening of Solo, you can kiss any more Star Wars May openings goodbye. Point number 2, the homogenization of Star Wars as a brand. A lot of you are probably saying, homogenization, what? What does that have to sit there do with any of this? Well, it actually has to do with a lot. Disney is deliberately trying to, Star Wars has always been super popular, but how I see it was that there was if any of you have the Star Wars Blu-ray set, the one that has I think it's the 9-disc, on the section, I think it's on one of the bonus discs, where it's like spoofs and satire of Star Wars. There's a SNL bit from, I think it was Luke Perry was hosting SNL. And he's doing the opening monologue, and one of the SNL people at that point was doing a thing of Obi-Wan Kenobi, where obviously Luke Perry is Luke Skywalker. And Luke Perry turns around and goes, come on, man, Star Wars jokes? Aren't we kind of past that at this point? And I'm pretty sure that skit aired in 1991. And that's what people have to realize. We as Star Wars fans live, eat, and sleep this thing, though. But we are not the ones that made The Force Awakens gross almost $1 billion in the U.S. and over $2 billion worldwide. Like I've said before on the podcast, the Star Wars movies are made for the people who think about Star Wars twice a year, when they buy their ticket and when they walk out of the theater. That's what these movies are meant for. Anything else that we as the diehards appreciate is icing on the cake, for them anyway, for the studio. And that's the thing with Star Wars. Star Wars is becoming so ubiquitous now, and people are, again, going back to psychology, people are conditioned through patterns. I can't speak to people under the age of 20 that weren't cognizant of the prequels growing up. But for anybody above that, Star Wars was this thing that showed up once every 3 years. It was there. It was an event. And it disappeared. Not like today, where you have a huge $200 million blockbuster practically opening every 2 weeks. Go back to even the release schedule of 1999, 2002, and 2005. Yes, the summer had blockbusters, but Star Wars really stood apart from all those. I know we'll get into Attack of the Clones in 2002 and the competition that faced later on, but Star Wars was this truly seismic event. They're really, again, forget about the 70s and 80s. In the early 2000s and late 90s, Star Wars was a unique thing, and The Force Awakens and Rogue One proved that. Even The Last Jedi to a certain degree. But yes, the ubiquitous nature of Star Wars is that it's everywhere now. By having it everywhere, you devalue it. When something is everywhere, it can't be special anymore. And that's what it comes down to. Is that and yes, Star Wars will always be special to us diehard fans, but to the people who think about it twice a year, or not twice a year, when they think about it twice at all when the movie comes out, the problem is that it's devalued. It's nothing interesting anymore. Star Wars was something that was supposed to be once every 3 years. Now it's all the time. So it's just it's common now. It's like, okay, it's the law of diminishing returns. You can't escape it. The second thing is the problem that's it's a cancer on Hollywood. It is the Marvelization of everything in Hollywood. Everything is a cinematic universe. Everything has to have multi-films to bridge a episodic storyline. And people have to realize, and Hollywood has to realize, that Star Wars is not Marvel. Nothing is Marvel except for Marvel and the MCU. Marvel can get away with doing these movies. Everyone's like, whoa, why can't Star Wars release a movie once every 3 months? Marvel does it. Well, Marvel has been releasing comics once a month for how many years? For decades. Star Wars was once every 3 years, and that was it, which I've already stated. And that's what it is. Marvel can sustain that sort of thing. They have enough stories to pull from. It's one of those things that, again, they are ubiquitous, and the culture has accepted them at that level. Star Wars was always, it's kind of like, imagine if I told you every day is your birthday. Every day we're going to have a cake. Every day we're going to have streamers. And every day we're going to have party hats. That would sound great to me, though. But the majority of people, they're like, I'd rather, you know what, once a year is more than enough for me. It's the whole idea. Star Wars is a celebration. You cannot have a celebration once every 3 months. Marvel is not a celebration every 3 months. Marvel is a book. The MCU is a very large book, and every movie is a chapter. Certain chapters it's like any sort of book you read. Certain chapters are better than other chapters. For every great chapter, Black Panther, you have an Ant-Man, where it's like, that was nice, but you know what? Don't really need that, or I'm not going to reread. That's not my favorite chapter. And I'm not taking anything away from you Ant-Man fans. Paul Rudd is lovely, but it ebbs and flows. The MCU is not every single time trying to hit it out of the park. Star Wars is constantly is aiming for the bleachers. And it's also worth noting, too, and this kind of goes what I said, Star Wars needs a refraction period. It needs a time where it's kind of like a bear. It needs to hibernate. It needs to go away for a while. Like, I make a joke to people when everybody in my social circle in real life knows I am the Star Wars aficionado. And I tell them, I'm pretty sure you could go to any store in this country, in the U.S., and no matter what aisle you walk up or down, you are going to find some sort of product with the Star Wars logo on it. And that's really cute when a movie is a month or two out from release. The problem now is that no matter where you go, Star Wars is punching you in the face. And again, for Star Wars, I guess I should have prefaced this whole thing with this. When you're listening to this, imagine you are an average moviegoer. You are not a Star Wars diehard fan. Look at this all under the gaze of an average moviegoer. And that's what it comes down to. Star Wars needs to hide, needs to go away. So when it does come back, it comes back in full force. It comes in, yay, Star Wars, not, oh, look, another Star Wars film, which I feel is the death of Star Wars. But again, we'll get to that later. And lastly, China. We always keep hearing about China. China's, I think I read an article this morning, China's going to surpass the U.S. as the number one box office movie-going landscape in the future. No, it's not. It's worth noting that in China, the movie studios, their maximum take of any given film there is around 50%. So when you hear headlines like, Infinity War grossed $300 million and it's opening 6 minutes in China, it's like, yeah, that's great, though. Disney ain't getting that much money from them. China, it's also something, China does an incredible amount of shady things. There's an infamous story that during when Terminator Genesis came out over there, another Emilia Clarke movie, is that the Chinese audiences were absolutely just going nuts over Terminator Genesis. But the Chinese government, obviously controlling everything they do over there, was selling tickets to the Chinese domestic film. And when they printed out the ticket, were crossing off that film's name and writing Terminator Genesis on it, obviously to direct the theater patrons to the correct theater. China is notorious for this. China is always doing things. Because I think Solo opened at $10 million in China. People are like, whoa, that's even worse than what Last Jedi got. And part of that reason why, too, is that Chinese audiences did not grow up with Star Wars. They really had no idea what it was, except for the last 5-10 years. So again, this China thing is definitely that's another problem going forward for Star Wars. How they're going to break into the Chinese market. They're not going to trust me, folks. Disney ain't walking away from China. They're not like, well, we gave it our shot after 4 movies. Let's move on then. Let's try to curry favor with the Russian audiences. No, they're going to keep going after that. So, but again, that's another topic for another day, though. But it's just worth noting, considering that China element is always in the conversation to a certain degree. All right, point number 3. Lackluster premise. I imagine everybody listening to this has probably heard at some point, nobody ever asked for a Solo movie. And then you'd hear defenders of the film prior to its release saying, well, it doesn't mean it can't be good. And that's the issue. If your audience is not asking for something, you can't expect them to be enthusiastic when you give it to them. Going back to the Marvel thing, people look at the MCU and Kevin Feige and say, wow, how is this guy able to do it? How to maintain this level of constant quality in box office, all the films firing on all cylinders that light up the box office. And part of the masterful prowess that man has is that, I'm not sure if many of you know, but most Marvel films have a gestation period of about 2 years. So if you're seeing a film right now, let's take, for example, Ant-Man and the Wasp. Usually most films that were started to be written about 2 years prior. So Ant-Man and the Wasp and Infinity War were beginning to get written sometime in early 2016. So it's interesting. That's how you usually gauge what's like. It's funny. You go back through the MCU's history and you can see what their thought process was. Like a lot of things like Age of Ultron. Like people didn't like Age of Ultron. And like, why didn't that film work? And you go back when Age of Ultron was being written, that was when Iron Man 3 came out. And you had the whole controversy with the Mandarin, which is very similar to the controversy with The Last Jedi about how characters should be portrayed on the screen. Or I guess fan possession of the character, fan entitlement of the character. And that's how you can usually tell how these films work. So probably the same thing can be said for Star Wars. As we all know, J.J. started writing Force Awakens in late 2012, early 2013. That had a very long post-production time frame. So did Last Jedi. Rogue One, not so much. We all know Rogue One's problems. But I think that's the issue, is that when they ordered this film a little over, I think it was 3 years ago when it was announced, sometime I think in July of 2015. And obviously it didn't really start getting written until probably after that. It's worth noting that Lucasfilm was not trying to predict what the audience wanted. They were making a film because Lawrence Kasdan wanted it. There's a story that's out there that Lawrence Kasdan was making a Han Solo movie with George Lucas before he sold Disney to Star Wars. And I'm like, sure. Like, I don't really believe that entirely. Lucas did what Lucas wanted. It's noticed Lawrence Kasdan wasn't involved with the prequels at all. But at the same time, they're working on a thing that they're not concerned with their audience. They're making a film because a producer wants it, not because their audience wants it. It's like, imagine if Robert Downey Jr. or I'm trying to think of a screenwriter from the MCU went to, I don't know. Like, imagine if Joss Whedon went to Kevin Feige and said, hey, I really want to make a Squirrel Girl movie or whatever it was. Whatever the one that, what's her name, Anna Kendrick wanted to be in. Like, if he went to Kevin Feige and said, I want to make this movie, Kevin Feige go, you know what? That's really not in the plans. That's not what we're doing going forward. Like, if we ever get, like, I'll keep it in mind and see maybe going forward if maybe like a year, 2 years, 5 years, a decade from now it might fit in. But at this current juncture, it's not where we're going. And I think that's another reason why, too, of the lackluster premise. This movie was not made because they felt their audience wanted this. They made it because a producer wanted it, which usually that's not how good things turn out, is when the producer's ego is driving the production, not what's best for the audience. And I know probably some of you are going, I hate The Last Jedi. See, you're telling me they have to cater in what my opinion is on things. No, we'll get to that in a moment. But one more thing that's worth noting, though, is that the one salvation for Solo with its lackluster premise was Lord and Miller. Lord and Miller being brought to Solo definitely gave it an air of creative freedom. It's like Lord and Miller, when they were like they made it Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, which I'm not sure if any of you know about that movie, but that movie does not, or I'm sorry, that book has no narrative. There's no characters in the sense of there's no like, again, narrative with like a plot, a love story, nothing like that. Yet they made it something much larger than that. Then even the Lego movie. They took the definition of just like product placement, the movie, and they elevated it to something bigger, and so on and so forth for the Jump Street films. They took a very dumb premise and they elevated it to something that people appreciate. And it's worth noting, all of those films made money. They were all profitable, despite the fact that people, when they were announced, said, "Oh God, this sounds derivative. We don't want that." And that was the genius in hiring them. And then obviously when it came to them getting canned, Kathleen Kennedy sided with Lawrence Kasdan over them, which you can't blame him for, because Lawrence Kasdan's ego was what was driving this project. It was. It wouldn't have been, this movie wouldn't have been made if it wasn't for the fact that Lawrence Kasdan was pushing it. Number 4, ineffective marketing campaign. There's a rule of thumb when it comes to movies opening up in major release, is that what your movie's opening weekend is, dollar-wise, is 100% based on the marketing. Everything after that, all the subsequent weekends, second, third, fourth, fifth weekend until it's out of theaters, is the word of mouth of your film. So like you'll hear movies that have a spectacular opening relative to what they should be doing, and then just crash hard. One of my favorite examples of this is Friday the 13th, the 2009 remake. That film had a $40 million opening weekend in February of 2009 and a total domestic gross of, I think, $60 million off the top of my head. The definition of a film that opened fantastic out of the gate, and then it crash landed in subsequent weeks because the word of mouth was disastrous on it. And that's the thing. Like even going back to Green Lantern. Green Lantern had a nice opening weekend in 2011. $60 million and a $20 million opening day on Friday. There's promise there. There's an audience there. And then it crashed. I think it didn't even get past $120 million in the U.S. Green Lantern. Another example of the word of the marketing. Definitely, I know Green Lantern had some marketing problems too, but it definitely held its ground in the marketing, and the word of mouth made it collapse. And which is, again, word of mouth is Solo's only salvation. And then Disney's marketing team. I've been following. I want people to know I've been following Disney forever. I guess I relish in this sort of details. Again, I know some people listen to go, well, how does he know this? He's not an insider. And I concede that entirely. I can only call him like I sees him. And in my experience, Disney has different tiers of marketing teams. They have an A tier and they have a C tier. And you'll know when the Disney A tier marketing team is working on something, because they were the ones behind the famous lineup for the first Avengers, where Tony Stark runs down the members of the Avengers. You probably all remember that from 2012. And they've done they were behind, obviously, The Force Awakens. You can tell when Disney's putting its tier A team behind a film. And this summer, obviously, that marketing team can only be put on one film at a time. And so Infinity War got it, because Infinity War was the kickoff of the summer. It's the culmination of the MCU for a decade, and Solo wasn't getting that. Never mind, the marketing for Solo began way too late. That first teaser for Solo should have been attached to Last Jedi. The marketing team did not have enough oomph to push Solo past the finishing line, which they should. There should be no excuses. Every marketing team in Disney should be the A team. They shouldn't, again, I guess that's what it is. Infinity War was the focus, and they didn't care about Solo. Moving on to point number 5. The loudest criticism, and the one you probably have heard the most, is the Last Jedi hatred. Again, this is the echo chamber of the internet. The guy who I got into the argument with on the Jedi Temple Archives comment section, obviously he feels it's worth noting that this, apparently, according to all these people, The Last Jedi is the reason why Star Wars is a doomed brand now. The Star Wars fans have collectively revolted. They are approaching Lucasfilm as we speak with flaming torches and pitchforks, and they are going to carry Kathleen Kennedy out. That could not be further from the truth. I think it's fair to say that the amount of Last Jedi haters in this world, I'd be surprised if they could fill up a phone booth. Never mind have the actual sway to affect a film's opening weekend. I know there's some people out there listening to that. They're just going to automatically discount what I'm saying. They're probably unsubscribing right now as I speak. But Last Jedi hatred is a drop in the bucket of many, many, many factors. Were there probably fans that said, no, I don't want any more parts of Star Wars? Or I know even like on Rotten Tomatoes, there was comments or reviews saying, I watched it illegally online. It's just, again, who are you trying to impress? I have a little bit of math that I want to discuss with everybody about the Last Jedi versus Solo's opening. So let's take the premise that The Last Jedi is solely responsible for Solo's bad debut. Here's some back-of-the-envelope math for you. The Last Jedi grossed $220 million in its opening weekend. Solo grossed $85 million. This is all from Box Office Mojo, by the way. That difference is a whopping $135 million. Also, according to Box Office Mojo, the average price of a movie ticket is $9.16. Yes, there's IMAX in there, there's 3D, there's all that. For the sake of simplicity, we are not going to try to figure that out. We're just going to do the straight average ticket price, $9.16. So you take $135 million and divide it by $9.16, and it comes out to 14,737,991 tickets were sold to Last Jedi's opening weekend, yet were not to Solo's. So let's just round that for the sake of argument. 15 million fewer tickets were sold to Solo's opening weekend than Last Jedi's. That is a huge discrepancy. Huge. Especially considering the fact these films only came out roughly 5 months apart from each other. And I don't know about you. Obviously, I'm not saying that 15 million less people went to go see The Last Jedi. Obviously, there was repeat viewing for Last Jedi that was there. Probably that wasn't for Solo. And so let's just even be kind. Let's say I have 15 million tickets discrepancy. Let's say that's 5 million people who chose not to see Solo opening weekend that did choose to see Last Jedi. Do you honestly believe that there's that many people on this planet that hate The Last Jedi with a seething passion that they're making the deliberate, voluntary choice, I am going to boycott this film in order to say, Kathleen Kennedy, your days are numbered in this town? No, that is not the case. I'd be shocked if even a tenth of that number of tickets or those amount of people had that in mind. Don't let anybody tell you that these Last Jedi haters have any sort of sway over this. Again, I'm not saying could they influence the box office by maybe $10 million? Sure, I could believe that. Someone put out a study or research saying, okay, $10 million was lost from Last Jedi to Solo because of the Last Jedi hatred out there. That I can believe in. No, like I said, that's nonsense. If you believe the fact, I don't mean to say sound. I know we've been condescending to people on here, me mostly, not Zenger, Mark, or Jim, but when it comes to Last Jedi detractors, if you didn't like The Last Jedi, that's perfectly fine. You're entitled to your opinion. What I don't like is when Star Wars fans go on the internet and say Rian Johnson is wrong because he didn't give me what I want. He's the director. Lucasfilm hired him to make the movie, not you. You don't get to tell a director that his film's bad just because you didn't like the choices in it. It's kind of like this is how I imagine this is how I talk to people that aren't in the Star Wars, and I tell them about the current rift in the Star Wars fandom, and I describe it like this. Imagine if your favorite cookie is chocolate chip. I invite you over to my house for cookies. You have no idea what cookies I'm making, and you know that. You know I'm not telling you they're chocolate chip cookies. I'm just telling you there's going to be cookies involved. And I am a world-class baker. I use the best ingredients. I use the best recipes. I use the best utensils, everything. And yet you love chocolate chip cookies. Yet I present in front of you the oatmeal raisin cookies. Objectively great oatmeal. They've been rated by professional critics. These are great oatmeal raisin cookies, the best. And so you take a bite of my cookies, and my cookies are delicious though. But just because they're not chocolate chip cookies, you spit it out, stomp on it, and start screaming, this is the worst oatmeal raisin cookie I've ever had. Well, that's exactly what the people who hate The Last Jedi are doing. They didn't like something, and just because they didn't like it, they're declaring it bad. Like I said, if you don't like elements of The Last Jedi, that's fine with me, but you cannot declare something bad just because it's not your favorite. It's like if I go to a restaurant and I want Coke and they serve me Pepsi, I can't claim it's the worst restaurant ever because they did not have the thing I like. You cannot do that. You're an insane person. Last Jedi hatred aside, let's move on to our next point. The prequels. It's worth noting also, and we've already discussed this in all of our Last Jedi coverage, but just to repeat again for emphasis, all the arguments against the prequel trilogy are now being used against the Last. It's that same rhetoric. If you want to get, I said before, but just in case anybody here is new, any new listeners, if you want to get a snapshot of the Star Wars fan community, or the people who think it's cool to hate Star Wars, if you want to know what they were thinking pre-Disney sale, go watch The People versus George Lucas. That entire movie is made up of people hating Star Wars because they disagree with the choices Lucas made. That is the best way to get a glimpse or a snapshot in time of what Star Wars hatred looked like pre-Disney. And if you watch that film, you cross out the word, anytime somebody talks, cross out the word prequel and replace it with Last Jedi, and it's the exact same arguments. And it's funny, you bring that up now, these people who hate The Last Jedi, and the rhetoric has changed. That was different. This is nothing compared to Jar Jar Binks. I'm like, yes, it was. Everybody complained about the prequels all the time. The prequel hatred really did not stop until The Last Jedi. It ebbed and flowed during The Force Awakens and Rogue One. But like those people, again, Red Letter Media, they never stop hating. Again, they still haven't hated. Again, think about it, because their entire foundation's on hating the prequels. Think if it wasn't for George Lucas, they would be nobodies. They'd just be a bunch of guys in there. Again, I love Red Letter Media, but again, if it wasn't for the prequels and George Lucas, they wouldn't be anybody. They'd be guys making videos with no budget because no one would know who they are. But moving on to our next point, understanding the film entertainment culture. What happened to Gareth Edwards in Rogue One and how it ties into Solo and Lord and Miller's response? I hope now that's common knowledge. When I was back on the Rebel Scum forums, I try to argue with people, or not even argue. I would try to explain to people what happened with Rogue One. Essentially what it was that Gareth Edwards made Rogue One. He put together an initial rough cut of the film. The studio executives looked at it and said, nope. And they felt that Gareth Edwards did not have the capacity to rectify the film in the way they felt was best. So they brought in Tony Gilroy, and they told Gareth Edwards, you are welcome to stay on this film. We will not make this a big deal in the press. But Tony Gilroy is essentially in control of this movie now. We'll listen to any sort of input you have, but Tony Gilroy has final say on the film. And Gareth Edwards took the deal. And it's worth noting, Gareth Edwards, again, directed a film that grossed over $1 billion worldwide, Rogue One, and yet it's been almost 2 years since that film's been out, and he has still not lined up a follow-up project. Think about that, folks. If he wasn't in director's jail, he wouldn't have problems lining up follow-up work. And so this is exactly what happened to Lord and Miller. Lawrence Kasdan found out that, because Lord and Miller add their own flair to things. There's a lot of emphasis on improvising, and obviously it's been very successful for them. As I've already stated, look through their filmography, mostly hits. So when they were on set, they were doing things like that. Lawrence Kasdan is a filmmaker that's very much a by the books. You read the lines in the script. If you maybe want to do a take or two of ad-libbing, that's fine. But it's basically you read what's on those pages and nothing less and nothing more. And so he went to Kathleen. Obviously, he went to them. They said, buddy, we're the directors. You get out of here. And Lawrence Kasdan went and cried to Kathleen Kennedy and was very staged. She sided with him because it was his movie. He was the push behind this. And so they made the deal to Lord and Miller saying, you guys are essentially out. We'll let you stay on. It's worth noting that the reason why they got fired and Gareth Edwards didn't was that you can't fire directors or you can't have them not on set while you're making the movie if you're letting other people dictate what's going on. That's why Gareth Edwards took the deal of they let him keep his name on the movie. But as long as he's on set, Disney can do whatever they want. Any producer, any extra help, the Tony Gilroy of the situation, he can direct the film, but as long as the director is involved with it. He might not have the final say, but the director has to be present. Kathleen Kennedy made that exact same deal to Lord and Miller, and they said, no, we're not going to have our names on a movie that we didn't direct. And Kathleen Kennedy said, well, sayonara. And that's how you got Ron Howard. And if anything, Ron Howard's probably the unsung hero of this. He had no vanity in this. He was hired help. He was brought in to help remedy the situation as best as he could. He's he's been involved with Lucasfilm forever, between things like American Graffiti. Kathleen Kennedy's known him forever. I imagine Lawrence Kasdan probably has a very friendly relationship with him. So he really was a party that could sit there, get along with everybody. And it's also worth noting the odd timing of the Boba Fett film announcement. Where I was at the time that was announced, that film was announced around 7 o'clock-ish, Thursday, May 24th, which a lot of you are saying, that's not too weird, until you realize May 24th at 7 p.m. was the exact time East Coast audiences were beginning showings of Solo: A Star Wars Story. Because where I was waiting in line for Solo, I do not get cell phone service, so when I got into the theater, my cell phone just started going buzz, buzz, buzz with notifications. I'm like, what is going on? And I'm like, Solo, it's like Boba Fett movie. James Mangold announced to direct it. And I'm like, why are they announcing this now? And a friend of the show, Porg Knight, was sending me this, and he's like, oh man, you know what that means? One of your predictions is coming true. And that's why I figured. I was naive at the time. I'm like figuring, clearly they want to get out ahead of this. And then after I saw the film, and obviously there's no Boba Fett, it kind of dawned on me, saying, why would they announce that now? I feel, it's like, once again, it hit me like a ton of bricks. It's just like the Rian Johnson announcement, where if you remember our Rian Johnson trilogy announcement back in November 2017, I said, why are they announcing this a month now before the movie comes out? Why wouldn't you wait until a month later when the movie's made a ton of money and say, look what Rian Johnson's doing. We're keeping him in the fold. And then I think I've stated before, they obviously announced it beforehand because they knew Last Jedi was going to be controversial to some degree. It was going to be, I don't think controversial, maybe provocative is the correct term. They knew Last Jedi was going to be a very provocative film, and they wanted to keep Rian Johnson in-house before it all hit the fan. And I think this Boba Fett film was the same thing. And plus, there is this thing in Hollywood when a film, it's kind of like, everyone remembers Fant Four Stick. Like before Fant Four Stick came out, and the same thing happened with the Amazing Spider-Man series. They're like I think before, right after Amazing Spider-Man 1 came out in July of 2012, they announced 7 sequels, like 2 weeks after that movie came out. And it's like, who does that? Who announces sequels for the third or fourth or fifth film in the series before the second one even has a script yet? And that's a thing Hollywood does. It's the idea of getting you on the hype train. They're telling you, you better get on now because the train's leaving the station. If you don't get on the ground floor, you're gonna be trying to catch up all the time since. And that's what that was. That was it. The Boba Fett thing was trying to create a positive headline before Solo, much like The Last Jedi, hit the fan with certain fans. No pun intended. Oh man, I'm 0 for 2 when it comes to comedy this episode. And I think that's what it was. That's something Hollywood does, and even Lucasfilm isn't immune to it. Going forward, this is my 7th point, and I think going forward, what it's going to be interesting what Disney Lucasfilm's response to this is going to be. Scott Mendelson had a great series of tweets about this. He is a writer for Forbes, and I quote, "The notion of the new Star Wars movies being unique and different from each other, and the notion of the new Star Wars movies adhering to a theoretical, quote, this is what Star Wars should be, end quote, ideal are not compatible. As long as large chunks of the fan base only accept XYZ as, quote, true Star Wars, end quote, then every film will be greeted with calls that Disney and Lucasfilm, quote, wrecked Star Wars, end quote. And since the loudest / angriest voices get to the top of the Google search results, they will shape the narrative. There will be large chunks of Star Wars fans who want, quote, new, unique, different, end quote, and those fans who want nostalgia and a certain throwback. Even if Disney is giving us both, as long as each new Star Wars film is viewed as, quote, the new direction, end quote, one half of the fandom will always be pissed, end quote. And even though, like I said, when it comes to box office prognostication, Scott really is the gold standard. You ain't topping him. He understands this in a way that I don't think anybody else does in entertainment journalism currently. His opinions on politics, you can keep those. But when it comes to box office, the man has his finger on the pulse of it all. And he's spot on there. It's that it's the same thing that's happening with the prequels. A narrative is being set. It's funny, you talk to people about, again, you go up to somebody now in their 30s to mid 40s and bring up the Star Wars prequels, even if they're not big Star Wars fans, they're going to tell you they sucked. That's just what it is, because the narrative was set in. Again, the red letter medias, the people from the people versus George Lucas, those persons have set the narrative for Star Wars. And it's interesting. Like, I remember back during our Last Jedi Aftermath coverage, the Making Star Wars the Steel Wars, the Making Star Wars, those folks, they were being a really good firewall to the Last Jedi hatred. They really were. But I've realized that there's no firewall for Solo on this. Certain people are, I've seen certain high-profile people in the Star Wars fan community are defending this. I know Ron Howard certainly is. He's been tweeting a storm about all the people. I think he's been retweeting people that enjoyed the film. Entertainment journalism, like all journalism or any type of journalism, measures success by how many things they destroy. And Star Wars, Disney is no exception. And that's the unfortunate thing. There's a narrative being set, and nobody outside of a handful of people are trying to turn the tide against it. And I think, and that's why part of the reasons why I'm making this video is that, this is why I'm recording this, is that there needs to be an explanation. I'm probably not explaining it as best as I could or as directly, but there needs to be some sort of, not defense, but an explanation. And that's what it boils down to. It's really disappointing that, again, like, I don't like Jurassic World. I think I've made that loud and clear. I am not thrilled with The Force Awakens. Yet at no point will I go onto the internet and try to stir up hatred towards something I love as a whole just because I did not like one particular chapter of it. And like I said, like, I think that's a reflection of the culture today, not just Star Wars, but as living in the U.S., living in the world. If you don't like something, nothing short of complete and utter destruction can be tolerated for it. But you did not come here to listen to me talk about the culture of the U.S. and the world as a whole. Conclusion to all this. Star Wars will be fine. Like I said, the people claiming Star Wars is irrevocably doomed, it's where, again, once again, history repeats itself. During the summer of 2002, in the year of 2002, Star Wars Attack of the Clones was not the highest film of the year. Heck, it was not even the highest grossing film of that summer. Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, and Spider-Man both outgrossed it that year, and people were complaining, oh man, Star Wars is doomed. I can still remember, I think I had this might not be the correct magazine, but I think it was Starlog. Starlog was still running in 2002. I remember having a copy of that where they claimed the Star Wars is dead or it was dying because, see, Spider-Man is the future of blockbuster filmmaking. Lord of the Rings is the future of blockbuster filmmaking. And it's worth noting that, look at The Amazing Spider-Man 2. That series, Spider-Man series, has had its ebbs and flows. It had its highs and it had its lows. Look at the Lord of the Rings. The Return of the King had how many Oscar wins, grossed how many, guys made over $1 billion in 2003. Yeah, look at the Hobbit movies. Those Hobbit movies have certainly tarnished the Lord of the Rings brand. And look at The Amazing Spider-Man. Look at the people who sat there, turned their noses up after the Andrew Garfield, Mark Webb films. So it's worth noting, Star Wars isn't doomed. It's like anything. It's going to ebb and flow. Not every film can make $2 billion. Not every film can break a record out of the gate. It's just the law of diminishing returns. And then even, again, I know I said let's not compare Star Wars or try to shape Star Wars into Marvel MCU's image, but I think you could compare Solo to the box office of Captain America: The First Avenger in the sense of what Star Wars is right now to what Marvel was back in 2011. Captain America: The First Avenger was the 5th MCU film. Solo is the 4th film of the Disney era of Star Wars filmmaking. And it's interesting that if you go back, Captain America: The First Avenger only made $60 million its opening weekend and grossed under $180 million total in the U.S. and had a final worldwide haul of around, I think, $360 million. I give or take maybe $20 million. I'm not entirely sure. I know it's definitely under 400. A box office total that is definitely possible that Solo could reflect. And it's worth noting that when that happened, it's worth noting that Captain America made less money than Thor. It made less money than Ant-Man. And yet Captain America is the most popular Avenger now out of all of them. Isn't that amazing? The character that had the lowest box office gross, except for the Incredible Hulk, 2008's Hulk, is the most popular Avenger. He's a character we clapped at for 45 minutes in Infinity War. Yeah, isn't it interesting that we're able to bridge these gaps? In this short span of 7 years, a character went from being the lowest grossing in the MCU to probably the most popular in the entire franchise. And I'm not saying that Alden Ehrenreich Solo is going to be the new Darth Vader in the face of Star Wars in a decade. No, certainly not. But it's the whole idea that these things can rebound. I definitely, like, I know people are talking if Solo made a lot of money, we would be getting Solo 2, Solo 3. Obviously the ending of Solo is the Star Wars equivalent of Nick Fury showing up at the end of Iron Man. I think we'll definitely see Alden Ehrenreich and Kira again. We've certainly not seen the last of those characters or these characters from these films. And I think that's what it is, though. Star Wars will be fine. But I do have to say that if you do, I remember there was a quick high school story. When 2010's Kick-Ass came out, there was a kid I knew in high school. That movie came out, had moderately successful opening weekend, and it didn't bomb, but it kind of tanked after that. I remember him every day on Facebook writing, "Go see this movie. This movie's too important to let it bomb." And everyone's like, "What is wrong with this person?" And I'm not telling you if you like Solo, go on Twitter, go on social media, and say, go see this movie. Don't do that. But if you like the movie, tell people you like the movie. If you like, the only way we're going to combat this Last Jedi hatred in this narrative of Star Wars, this new narrative being put forth in Star Wars, is be positive about Star Wars. I'm not saying go up to the street and people say, I love The Last Jedi, and just run out of their face. I'm not saying do that. But if you like Star Wars and it comes up in a conversation or the current direction it's going in, tell people. I tell people when I see them all the time about Star Wars. I'm always wearing Star Wars T-shirts, and people are like, "Oh, what'd you think of this? What'd you think of that movie?" I'm always telling them I love these movies. I was a little hesitant about The Force Awakens, but now they're 3 for 3 when it comes to Rogue One, Last Jedi, and Solo, and that's what it comes down to. Much like, I know everybody mocks Rose from The Last Jedi for saying this, though. We're not going to win by destroying the things we hate. We're going to win by preserving the things we love. And that's the ultimate mission going forward with Star Wars in the narrative in the Star Wars fan base. And that concludes understanding the box office failure of Solo: A Star Wars Story. So concludes this very lengthy Solo episode discussing the box office failure of Solo: A Star Wars Story on Knights of Vader, a Star Wars podcast. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at KOV Podcast. Check out skywardfunsupply.com for all your toy needs. If you like what you hear, please rate, review, and subscribe to us on iTunes, and share us with friends and family that might also like Star Wars. For questions, comments, concerns, or snide remarks, contact me, Zack, on Twitter at RogueKnight, KNITE, and on the Cinemoddities podcast, where you can find me talking about more Dean Norris nonsense. Thank you for listening, folks. I bid you farewell until next time.